Oh, yeah. Good evening, everybody. It's Byron Stripling here with Offstage Live. And we have a great guest today. We have a word for the day for you, too, and that is never take your eye off the truth. As the old folks used to say, the truth will set you free. For decades, the Jazz Arts Group executive director, Press Southworth, has been an integral part of the arts community in Columbus. And we are so happy to report that he is now back home recovering from COVID-19. And as he recovers, please continue to send good thoughts and prayers his way. Press, we love you. Please consider returning your tickets that you've purchased for our March or April shows back to CAPA, that's the Columbus Association for Performing Arts. They turned that into a donation for us, and we need your help now more than ever. You can reach CAPA at 614-469-0939. Again, that's CAPA at 614-469-0939. There you can donate your March or April tickets back to us. And speaking of that, consider making a 100% tax deductible gift to the Jazz Arts Group via our jazzemergencyfund.com. That's jazzemergencyfund.com. And there you can make a gift via credit card or get information on where to send a check. That's very important. As we know, COVID-19 has devastated the arts community all through the world, but we're going to make sure the legacy of the Columbus Jazz Orchestra and the Jazz Arts Group stays alive, well, and poppin', and we do that through your kind support. What we know is that no act of kindness is ever too small, so whatever you can help us out with there, we appreciate it. And speaking of helping us out, we thank those who have already contributed, including Kyle, George, Vanessa, and Ann. We love you so much and we thank you. And we also always want to say thank you to Dennis, Ann, and Tom, John, and Patricia. We love you so much. Tom and Joan, we love you so much. And Sandy, the beautiful Sandy, we love you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is my pleasure to welcome to Offstage Live a man who speaks and writes with the same warmth and love that you feel from Louis Armstrong's horn. His book, What a Wonderful World, that book is right here. I want to show that to you. You must get this book. His book, What a Wonderful World, was recommended to me by Ken Poplowski, incidentally, and it established Ricky as one of the world's authorities on the great Satchmo, Daniel Louis Satchmo Armstrong. In that book, and in a few moments, you'll learn of Armstrong's innate ability to bring people together through music and leave inspired by Ricky's seldom heard, heartfelt stories of America's gift to the world. And we know that's Louis, once again, I'm talking about. After reading Ricky's book, I did three things I'd never done before. The first thing I did was I cried. And it was the emotional power of his writing that made me cry. The book caused me to reflect on the power of music and made me realize Ricky's innate ability to bring the life of Louis Armstrong to life through words. That's the first thing I did. The second thing I did is I wrote a review on Amazon.com. I had never done that before, but I wanted to publicly endorse the incredible biography Ricky had given to the world. And the final thing I did was to try and contact Ricky. I had never stalked anyone before, but I stalked Ricky. And in this case, I felt the need to personally touch base with him and tell him how great his book was and how it literally changed my life. Only other book that did that for me was the autobiography of Malcolm X, written in conjunction with Alex Haley. And then Ricky's book did that for me. But connecting with Ricky led to an invitation from him to visit the Louis Armstrong Archives in Queens. Somewhere we have a picture of us hanging out at the archives in Queens, me and Ricky with Louis Armstrong's picture behind us. But we hung out there. And if we can find that picture, it's a cool one. Additionally, Ricky invited me to perform at Louis Armstrong's house like a couple years ago. And there in Queens, there we are, an attractive yet motley crew right there, I've got to say. Beautiful looking guys there. Is there another one with me playing Louis' trumpet? 'Cause look at that. Now, you know I'm in heaven right there. And Ricky made me wear the gloves. That wasn't a trick that we were trying to do. um, but Ricky then invited me to the archives in Queens, and that's where I got to play the horns, and where I got even more time to sit with Ricky and listen to him preach the gospel of Armstrong. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Offstage Live the great Ricky Riccardi. Ricky, are you there?
I'm here. I'm here. Holy cow! What an intro.
Yes, yes. Well, you better live up to that. Well, first, I want to say Happy Easter to you. And did you do anything Easter with the family?
Just ate my weight in chocolate.
Now that's a hard task, but I'm sure you were up for it, and I was too. I'm trying to save my chocolate, my Easter eggs, till later tonight after I finish with you. Otherwise, I would have fallen to sleep. I wanted to jump right in with you because I want people to experience your knowledge and your love, especially. And you said in so many words, and you got to correct me if I say this wrong, but I've heard you say something to the effect of, and this was after one of our conversation, and I always remember that you said, I want to be here because Lewis isn't here to speak for himself. And as a historian, I can use facts as well as Lewis's own written and oral, words to set the record straight. Now, Lewis also said, he always said, excuse me, I'm here in the cause of happiness. And he continued, I'm not looking to be on no high pedestal. The people who hear me get their soul lifted because they got the same soul that I have the moment I hit the note. His wonderful world continues to bring us all together, and it's a song that we need and use during this time. What are other songs? And can you tell us, first of all, maybe the story behind What a Wonderful World and how that happened for him? And are there other songs that can do that and bring us all together during this time?
I mean, I know I'm biased, but I would say also, if you're listening to Louis Armstrong, I think he's the best medicine. When you think about it, his music got us through the Depression. It got us through the 1960s. Yeah. And even though he's been gone it'll be 50 years next year, I guarantee you he'll help get us through this as well. What a Wonderful World, actually, the backstory is kind of appropriate. It was written by a songwriter named George David Weiss. He was a great songwriter, professional songwriter, wrote The Lion Sleeps Tonight and Can't Help Falling in Love for Elvis. He was approached by Bob Thiel, and yep. Bob Thiel was looking around saying, it's 1967, we're at war, Vietnam, protests, assassinations, race riots. We need a message of unity. We need Louis Armstrong. And so that's all Weiss had to work with. And so Weiss writes the song, What a Wonderful World, specifically for Armstrong. Armstrong takes one look at the lyrics and he boiled them all down to the neighborhood he had been living in Corona, Queens since 1943, especially the line about, friends shaking hands and, I see babies cry and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. To him, that was it. He always said he saw 3 generations grow up on that block. And so it became a very personal song to him. They recorded August 16th, 1967. Tommy Goodman writes the arrangement. Bob Thiel hires a whole string section, choir, the whole thing. The only thing is Thiel does not tell Larry Newton, the president of ABC Paramount Records. And when Newton walks in and sees the choir, sees the string section, and hears Armstrong singing this kind of preachy ballad, he almost pulls the plug on the whole session, because you have to remember, this is coming right after Hello, Dolly. Louis knocks the Beatles off the top of the charts in 1964 with a Broadway show tune. And for the next 3 years, almost everything he records is a knockoff of Hello, Dolly. It's like a formula. All stars plus Broadway show tune plus banjo, and then you cross your fingers and hope for that magic. And they almost got there a few times. So Long Dearie hit the Billboard charts, Mame hit the Billboard charts, Cabaret hit the Billboard charts. But What a Wonderful World was completely different. And so Larry Newton and Bob Thiel, the producer, they almost come to blows in the studio. They end up recording the song, but Newton decides to sabotage it and does no promotion. And this is the truth. Thiel used to tell this story, but I went through every issue of Billboard magazine. It actually got a great review in Billboard. And then Louis went right on the Tonight Show and performed it. And you would think that would be enough But without any other radio airplay or any advertisements or anything, the song sank without a trace in America. But Newton forgot about overseas, and overseas in 1968, it became #1 around the world, knocked the Beatles off the charts again, knocked the Rolling Stones off the charts. And so it was a worldwide hit. But when Armstrong died in 1971, it was far from his best known tune here in America. And it wasn't until it was used in Good Morning Vietnam in 1986 that all of a sudden Armstrong found himself back on the charts 15 years after he died. And now it's by far his most iconic, most popular song. But for me, you know, working at the Louis Armstrong House Museum, there's that extra bonus of the connection to Queens, the fact that that song is his personal anthem for Queens, and that's really special.
Yeah. Wow. Never ask Ricky a question because you'll get the full story. That's great. That's amazing. You know, we're talking about Queens, and around the time that you started working for the Louis Armstrong House and Archives, they had recently discovered tapes, and they had discovered scrapbooks that were created by Louis. I mean, this was an amazing find. I remember I used to talk to Michael Cogswell, who was before you and during your tenure too. And he said, we've got these tapes and we've got these scrapbooks, but they haven't yet really gotten to them. Everybody was digging around in the house. Tell us about the discovery of the scrapbooks and the reel-to-reel tapes of Louis and what they were, and the importance to Louis Armstrong's life and the importance to jazz in general.
I mean, people didn't know this, but Armstrong was his own archivist. So, I mean, the man published 2 autobiographies, about a dozen magazine articles, was on the radio all the time, interviewed all the time, Life magazine, Time magazine, cover stories. So his story was out there, but people didn't know that beginning in the 20s, he started making these scrapbooks, collecting newspaper clippings and advertisements, anything he could find. When he moved to Queens, he began writing down more stories, collecting photographs, and finally, in 1950, he got his very first reel-to-reel tape recorder. His trombonist, Jack Teagarden, actually had one before him, but Teagarden really only used it to dub records onto tape. Once Armstrong got his own, he realized from the very first tape that this could be something, a little different. So he starts immediately recording himself practicing, recording the band live in concert so he could listen to them and study his own performances. He records backstage conversations at home in Queens, fights with his wife, getting high, telling dirty jokes. I mean, you name it. He ends up making about 700 of these reel-to-reel tapes between 1950 and making tapes right up to the night before he died in July 1971. And he passes away. And before he died, he told Lucille Armstrong, these tapes are very important. Don't get rid of them. Don't sell them. And on multiple tapes, he actually uses the phrase "for posterity" when talking about why he was doing this. So to me, this is the brilliance of it all. He knew one day, I mean, let's not mince words. He is the most down home and humble, genius in the world. But he also knew that he overcame racism and poverty and changed the sound of music. And he told people that they were going to write about him in history books one day. And I think he was probably also tired of reading the negative things that were coming out during his lifetime. Louis is an Uncle Tom. He can't play the trumpet anymore. He's gone commercial. He's, all these wrong-headed assumptions. So the tapes tell you the full, uncensored story of his life. So he dies in 1971. Lucille Armstrong devotes her entire widowhood to saving everything. She dies in 1983, and Queens College stepped forward to administer everything in the house. The Louis Armstrong Educational Foundation donated the tapes, the scrapbooks, the writings, everything found in the house, donated them to Queens College. And Michael Cogswell was hired and opened up the archives. All about the opening. It was May 25th, 1994. The Lauren Schoenberg Big Band, special guest Byron Stripling and Lionel Hampton dedicated the archives. So that's great. And right then and there, you can start seeing perceptions about Armstrong change. Once Gary Giddens gets into this material, once Wynton Marsalis, Ken Burns, multiple, Terry Teachout, Thomas Brothers, once these people start having access, things change. Now, for me, I had already written a 350-page master's thesis for Rutgers University. I got a master's in jazz history and research, all about Armstrong's later years. And I interviewed everybody I could find: George Avakian, Jack Bradley, Dan Morgenstern, Danny Barcelona, Marty Napoleon, Joe Muraney, Buddy Catlett, Jewel Brown. And so I had my views that Armstrong was not an Uncle Tom, and Armstrong was still playing brilliantly in the 50s and blah, blah, blah. But I was missing him. And so in 2006, I made my very first appointment just as a researcher to go to the Armstrong archives. And all I wanted to do was hear these tapes. And they handed me this giant catalog with hundreds of tape descriptions. And I didn't have time. They were almost closed. So I picked an early tape with an interview from Benton Harbor, Michigan in 1956. And in that 1.5 hour tape, it was my whole thesis. It was Armstrong bragging that he was playing better than ever, talking about his album Ambassador Satch, how great that was, talking about, venting about progressive jazz and people who put labels on music, and the worst thing that happens in music was styles and category. And so I'm writing the whole thing down, and I realized this is it. So for the next 3 years, I went there as often as humanly possible, listened to as many tapes as possible. Then I got to get the job in 2009. I got a 2-year grant to hire an archivist. So now I was there doing other duties, but listening to these tapes every day. And long story short, I think the only 2 people who've listened to every one of the tapes are Louis Armstrong and myself. And so I feel like I know him better than I know some family members. I mean, he is, I know the ins and outs and everything about him. And so that is the cornerstone of my research. There are still people out there who like to try to psychoanalyze him, try to assume his motives, whether they're for good or for, evil or ignorance or whatever you want to call it. I just want him to speak for himself, because I think to go through the trouble of making 700 reel-to-reel tapes and publish 2 books and write all these autobiographical manuscripts and 85 scrapbooks to compile them in your spare time, you want people to take you seriously. You want to be in charge of your own story. And so my first book that you referenced so lovingly, and my second book, which comes out this summer, the cornerstone is really Armstrong's own words. And you can still read them and disagree with his choices and disagree with his words, but at least now you might have a better understanding of where he's coming from. And that's really all I want to do. I'm not there to defend every move he ever made. It's just let the man at least answer these critics that have been hounding him for 50, 60 years.
Yes, beautiful. Quickly tell us the scrapbooks. What's in the scrapbooks?
Oh, so the scrapbooks, they kind of come in 3 flavors. Some of them are photo albums with photos you will never see anywhere else. Other ones are more artistic. Again, during his lifetime, he didn't really talk about this publicly, but Armstrong loved making collages. I mean, it makes perfect sense, collage being such a kind of jazzy, improvised medium. So he would design these collages, and actually today on the Louis Armstrong House Museum Facebook page, we shared a collage he made out of an Easter card that Lucille, his wife, had given him in 1952. So there's some beautiful art. And then the other one are news clippings and programs and ticket stubs and really personal mementos, greeting cards, telegrams, and these actually begin in 1925. And those provided to be so crucial to actually both my books, because the first book I wrote, What a Wonderful World, there was always this myth hanging on Armstrong that he was a real serious artist in the 1920s, but then he woke up one morning and decided to become a sellout and go commercial and become a clown just so he could make some white people happy and get some money and just waste his genius. And that was really a serious thing that followed him into the grave and beyond. And so I never really bought that. But it wasn't until I went through these 1920 scrapbooks where almost every time he's mentioned in the papers, and this is the black press in Chicago, it's always for the showmanship. He's doing routines in drag, he's dancing, he's doing preacher routines, he's scatting, he's doing, Noel Coward's Poor Little Rich Girl and Cavalier Rusticana and pop songs and this and that. And so that's when I realized that his career is actually kind of a straight line. He changes with the times. He always knows what's going on in pop music. His style matures as he gets older, saying more with less and stuff like that. But, the combination of showmanship and singing and scatting and comedy and dazzling trumpet playing, it's all there in the 1920s. And so that was huge for the first book. And for this next book that's coming out this summer, that's all about Armstrong's big band years. And he made scrapbooks of him in England, 1932. Every clipping, some of the most racist reviews you will ever read in your life, he saved every one of them. Or 1931, going back to New Orleans, he was there for 3 months. He saved all the clippings, telegrams from a superintendent of a school that was so touched by Armstrong's visit, and just beautiful stuff. So again, this stuff does not exist on the internet. And so to be able to rely on materials that he himself compiled as the basis of my research, I mean, it's a researcher's dream.
Wow. Incredible stuff, Ricky. You always blow me away. Let's continue on the entertainment issue. And I've always felt that Armstrong's gift as an entertainment, the entertainment part was really a delivery system that brought his music to the people. And he never made any apology about this. And it served him, as you've mentioned, throughout his career. Incidentally, we could think of somebody like Miles Davis, who also always began to follow the trends, and by the end was wearing costumes that people call clothing, but those things were costumes. With the hair transplant and the way his hair looked at the end, could have been said a similar thing. I'm going to get a lot of flack for that, and I won't make any apology for it either. But you can just look at that, and it's a visual that Miles was able to capture, as Armstrong always did. And so, as we say, the musicians and the critics and the others were nonstop in their relentless criticism of him for this, on all his antics. But curiously, all he was really doing was, in some way, always disarming people to me with a smile. So, the best thing I've heard about this, and you mentioned clowning, was something that you played for me on one of the tapes of Louis Armstrong talking backstage. And there he says, and you played for him, he says, clowning is when you can't play nothing. That's basically it. Clowning is when you can't play nothing. Is your mic on? I want you to speak to that.
Yeah. No, in that same clip, he says anything to, give the audience a little bit of humor. You put some humor in your program, and he goes, but the note still comes out. And so that's the whole thing with him. He once referred to himself as an old ham actor. And so from growing up in New Orleans, in poverty, he talks about, like, the first time he really ever got applause was in church for doing Burt Williams routines. And so early on, he realizes that, he is funny. He is legitimately funny. And that comedy, can also be a way out, comedy and music. So that's why maybe one of the seminal moments of his life, he's in Chicago with King Oliver, idol #1, and he goes to see Bill Bojangles Robinson, who quickly becomes idol #2. And so Robinson teaches Armstrong about timing, about delivery, about humor, about how to tell a joke, how to land a punchline. And so that's the thing, we get so trained and so wrapped up in the jazz world just to focus on the notes coming out of his horn, that when it comes to these kind of, these extra components to his persona, it's like, well, he was just doing that, going through the motions, whatever. It's like, no, you listen to the tapes, you look at the photographs in his collection. I would almost say he's more comfortable around Black comedians than he is around musicians. His best friends on stage, Slim Thompson, Red Fox, and Timmy Rogers. Oh my God, Mantan Moreland, all these people. There are tapes of him and Slim Thompson, who was totally forgotten, but he's an African-American pioneer. He was in the Petrified Forest with Humphrey Bogart. Tapes of them in the 50s talking about the routines they would write in Philadelphia backstage in 1931. And they're pure, like almost Abbott and Costello vaudeville routines. And so Louis, took this so seriously. And I mentioned the key word there, vaudeville, which again, we have this kind of romanticized notion. Oh, the big band era, the swing era, it's just a bunch of big bands playing for dancing every night, and jazz is popular music. But Louis traveled with a review, and they took part in these big bills where Lewis would have a comedian, and he would have a male vocalist and a female vocalist, and he would have, the two Zephyrs with young Slappy White would come out and do a slow motion crap. And then, Slim and Sweets would do a Romeo and Juliet routine. And, and so there are reviews where like Variety would review the entire vaudeville bill. And they're like, so-and-so with his personality, really put it over this week. Or, I read all the reviews of the Apollo Theater. I mean, how they loved Armstrong, but they into the 40s, they still loved Step and Fetch It, and they loved Pigmeat Markham. But at first, they did not love Dizzy Gillespie. They did not love Billy Eckstine. There's like, there's no show here. It's just music. So all of that is developed in front of Black audiences at a very early age. And so the interesting thing is when Armstrong breaks up the big band and forms the All-Stars, he kind of becomes like the one-man embodiment of everything he had learned on stage in Black show business. So yes, you're going to get these trumpet solos that are just, lights out. And yes, you're going to hear the greatest jazz singer of all time. But you're also going to get these comedy routines, whether it's telling the alligator story, which I don't need to tell now, or the waitress joke and all these jokes that he learned backstage at the Apollo Theater and, all these kinds of things. So comedy was a way of, putting his music over, as you mentioned, disarming audiences. I mean, he's going in the South in the 1930s, where, he is putting up, basically, realizing very quickly if he's going to get through the night, unscathed, if the audience is going to give him trouble. So he needs to turn that personality on. But where people really kind of go wrong is they think he's like flipping a switch, like it's fake. And so that, I think, is another key thing, is that the people who took the time to really meet Armstrong, spend time with him, hang out with him, they all came away saying the same thing. This is the most natural man who has ever walked the face of the earth. Honey Cole said it. Dizzy ended up saying it. Dizzy said he misjudged Armstrong as a young man. Dexter Gordon, Maxine Gordon's full of beautiful stories about how Dexter felt about him. But anybody who didn't really get close to him that way and just saw him on stage, I mean, I'm talking, John Lewis. I've seen, I don't want to call the names, but some jazz greats just thought that has to be an old phony out there smiling and hamming it up, and he's bringing down the race and he's embarrassing himself. And that is, I think, one of the things, one of my big takeaways of listening to all the tapes and everything. The man's a human being. He has a temper. He could curse. He could be vindictive. All that stuff is true. But 90% of the time, he's the life of the party, the loudest laugh, telling jokes, everything. And so there's something about how comfortable he is in his own skin and how comfortable he is with his Blackness at a time when it's not, the norm. He's recording, I'm confessing that I love you, and if I could be with you 1 hour tonight, and just offering Black sexuality on pop records in 1930, years before Billy Eckstine, years before Nat King Cole or Sam Cooke or anybody else. And so to be so comfortable with himself and using slang and calling the Pope daddy and making references to laxatives and late night TV, I think a lot of people who aren't as comfortable in their own skin, they get, they can't take that for too long. It's like, it's embarrassing. But he never apologized to anybody. He never, code switching or anything like that. What you saw was what you got. White, Black, overseas, international audiences. He always gave you 100% the real Louis Armstrong every time he breathed.
Well, fantastic stuff. Well, in that spirit, I'd love to play for our audience one of the first recorded versions of video versions. And do you know what was this when he went to the Netherlands, or where was this?
Denmark.
Denmark.
Yeah. His very first tour of Scandinavia. He had been through England, and he had been in England since July 1933. But in October of 33, the British dance band leader Jack Hilton set up this tour of the Scandinavian countries. When Armstrong arrived in Denmark by train, there was 10,000 people waiting at the train station. And he was sure that it had to be for somebody else, maybe some actor or hero or politician, but they were there for him. And this, 32 years old, his first time stepping foot in the country. And it's fascinating because he had already made 2 movies that survived. Well, his first movie does not survive, X-Flame. But then he made 2 Paramount shorts, I'll Be Glad When You're Dead, You Rascal You, and Rhapsody in Black and Blue. And they have so many racial stereotypes. I mean, they make him a cannibal, and they put him in a leopard skin and sing and shine. It's awful. But now he's in Denmark, and they're coincidentally filming kind of a, you know, like a review type musical, and they allow Armstrong in his tuxedo with his hot Harlem band, as they were billed, to just perform as they were performing on stage every night. And so we get 3 songs, 9 full minutes of him, you know, you can always say at the peak of his powers in 1933.
And so this particular, I want to just emphasize what you just told us about the entertainment. And to me, this is the guy that puts it all together. So the count off is a showbiz count off, but it feels right to me. It feels the right, you know, the sort of, as the band's playing the first part of it, he's dancing around, the introduction and the way he introduces it, it's all already there. So if Alexa and Zach could run Tiger Rag.
One of the good old swing numbers. The Tiger Rag, the Tiger Rag. Look out there. 1, 2.
So look, as I'm watching you watch the video, which was more because I've seen the video. I used to watch that video every morning when I lived in New York. Probably I had found what do you call it, VHS of it. And so every morning, that's how I woke up, and it energized me and woke me up. But as I'm watching you watch it, it's like you're watching a relative, and you're just like, yeah, that's my dad. Like, it's like, it's like the love that you have for this guy is so genuine. 2 things, and then I'll let you talk if you want to comment on that particular thing. The first one is, you know, our audience should realize that the time is really fast. So it's 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. And rather than bebop wasn't in vogue then, so Louis creates these amazing lines on top of that at a slower tempo, as the time's going by fast like that. And that's the genius of his creative thing. And then the second thing, if you look again, and you can find that video on YouTube, and that's where we got it. If you look at the drummer in the back, there is no hi-hat. There is a bass drum, and there's a snare, and there's a small cymbal, which he never rides on. And so he can choke to and fro that, and check, 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 check. And then sometimes he's just playing the snare and bringing us the time from to give us the time that way. So those are 2 unique things about that, historically about that, because the hi-hat and all that hadn't yet come into vogue. And so that was the way people made the time happen. Do you have any comments about Tiger Rag on that particular one?
Oh man, how much time we got? You know, one thing right off the bat, he introduces as one of those good old swing numbers. And, you know, historians tell us that the swing era began in 1935. And so this is 1933. And to him, this is already one of those good old swing numbers. So, yeah, he was using the word swing on record 1931. You're driving me crazy. So to him, that's why, you know, when the swing era comes, it's like, finally, you know, you finally caught up with me. The drummer, Ollie Tynes, he's great. But it's Lewis, like you said, the floating style. Hold on one second. We have yes. This is. Where's mom? Where's mom? Check your room. Can't plan it.
I wanted to say hi.
Everyone wants to be part of the act.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's interesting. Right now, as we speak, I'm teaching a Music of Louis Armstrong course at Queens College. And I'm blessed to do a lot of different things related to Armstrong. And I think I have to say my favorite thing is teaching this course. Because this year I got 23 students all going for jazz performance degrees, jazz composition degrees, marvelous musicians, world-class musicians. And most of them, you know, the great majority admitted before this class, they never really checked out Armstrong. And so that's just jazz education is completely broken And so it was interesting. In the early weeks, their ears, all they wanted to do was pick up traces of bebop. And so Lewis played a quick double time run with the hot five. I was like, oh man, that was almost bebop. I'm like, oh man. I said, he's doing something a little different. And finally, when we got into this big band stuff and him floating just over across the bar lines, and then I had them transcribe. They had to transcribe one solo before 1935, and now they're transcribing one solo after 1935. And that's the comments I keep getting, just about the rhythm and the endurance and all the stuff that's needed. And so, you can learn so much by studying any period of Armstrong. But that's the thing. People don't transcribe. They don't. They don't check out. There's no, Louis Armstrong Omni book that everybody gets on the first day of jazz school. Some still work to be done.
That's good stuff. I don't want to beat a dead horse, and you've talked about this a little bit, and so have I. But he often got that label of being an Uncle Tom, and the civil rights era brought like this intense rebellion against the government and also the other institutions, the ones we like and we don't like, during that period of time. And then many people felt that Lewis's voice was needed at that time. When is he going to speak out? He's one of our heroes, to some. To your point, not everybody had sort of turned the corner, and I still have relatives now. It's like, I don't get him. Too much smiling,
Yep,
So,
yep.
So people thought, well, with civil rights era, Lewis's voice is needed. And we lost his voice during this important time in history. So, in your view, did Lewis stand on the sidelines during the civil rights music, or was he doing things that moved it forward?
Well, I mean, we're getting to deep territory here. One thing is that there probably wouldn't have been a civil rights era, you could say, without Armstrong's the barriers that he broke down. To put it bluntly, Armstrong was playing the long game, and so he came up at a time growing up in New Orleans, seeing race riots, seeing lynchings, being part. He called it a disgustingly segregated city. The fact that he got out of there alive is kind of a miracle with such a positive spirit. He mentions he goes to Chicago and New York. He said he got northern five, meaning he forgot a lot of that foolishness, is the way he put it.
Yeah.
So he goes out on the road though in 1931, and that foolishness is still there. And so it's him dealing with hell on the road. The band getting arrested for having the manager's white wife on the bus in Memphis. It's him not being announced on the radio in New Orleans. The announcer using the N-words. I won't introduce him. And so what does he do? He does his own announcing, becomes the first African-American to make his own announcements on the radio in New Orleans, 1931. First African-American to have it in his contract that he wouldn't play a hotel unless he could stay there. 1936 becomes the first African-American to get featured billing in a major Hollywood film, Bing Crosby's Pennies from Heaven. 1937 becomes the first African-American to host a nationally sponsored radio show, the Fleischman's East Show. By 1947, when it forms the All-Stars, he makes sure it's integrated. And, Mesro said that him and Lewis talked about that in the 1920s. Integration was their idea of the millennium. And so now he's touring with an integrated band, going down south, putting his arm around Jack Teagarden, singing, these songs of brotherly love. And so to him, where he is by the early 50s, when the civil rights movement really gathers steam, is a completely different world from what he grew up in. And he knows it's because of the example that he has led. I mean, one quick story, I think a lot of people know, but if you don't know, 1931, Lewis goes to Austin, Texas, and plays a dance. And there's a young guy there named Charles Black, who was raised in the South, raised to be a racist, never really thought about black people. Louis Armstrong comes on stage, and Black's whole mind melts. And he goes, for the first time, he's confronted by genius. It's a black man. And Black's whole world changes to the point where in 1954, he is helping to write the decision of Brown versus Board of Education that desegregates the schools. And, so this is the impact he's having. But to get to your point, Thurgood Marshall, who was the leader of Brown versus Board of Education, calls Lewis the biggest Uncle Tom in the world in 1957. So how does that happen? And I think that's just these turbulent 1950s where the movement is gathering steam, and Armstrong kind of shoots himself in the foot a few times. King of the Zulus in New Orleans is the blackest tradition imaginable, and it was Lewis's lifelong ambition to become king. If you live in New Orleans, you know what that's all about. But if you don't, and you're reading the Chicago Defender or the Pittsburgh Courier, and they're printing photographs of Louis Armstrong in blackface, that's strike one. And then he returns to the All-Stars, which is my favorite period, but it's inherently a traditional jazz trumpet, trombone, clarinet kind of thing, which was an out-of-date style for African-American audiences. He loved his big band. Up till 1947, his last engagement with the big bands, the Apollo Theater. Black audiences were with him right to the end. But he makes this change to make his music a little, more traditional, and he loses that part of the audience. Then 1951, he records his theme song, When It's Sleepy Time Down South, which is written by black songwriters, and they wrote it in 1931 with the word darkies in it, and Lewis records it that way because that's how he always did it. And all of a sudden they're protesting and they're breaking his record. So it's really strike one, strike two, strike three. By the early 50s, the black audience is leaving him. And as more artists are taking stands and they won't play segregated venues and stuff like that, Armstrong's still kind of doing the slow but steady thing. And he, doesn't want to speak out. He doesn't want to insult any audiences. He knows that he's changing people's minds. He knows that his music is bringing people together. But to answer the second part of your question, what did he do during the Civil Rights era? Little Rock. Little Rock to me kind of trumps everything, because here you have, the Little Rock Central High School is going to become integrated. Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus sends in the National Guard to prevent this from happening. And for days on TV is footage of white audiences spitting on Armstrong, cursing at Armstrong. And finally, he tells Larry Lubinow that the way that the government's treating my people in the South, the government can go to hell. And Eisenhower, has no guts. And I mean, the stuff he just went on the record. And then when that made all the newspapers, Armstrong's road manager tried taking it back, and Lewis doubled down on everything. And he went on for weeks, just sticking his neck out. And so to me, whatever you want to say about the smiling or whatever, the people who, Dizzy Gillespie called him an Uncle Tom in Esquire magazine in May of 1957. And here's Louis Armstrong in September 1957 telling the president that he can go to hell. And, Dizzy didn't do that. Miles didn't do that. And Mingus writes Fables of Faubus, but doesn't record it until 59. And, Sammy Davis criticizes Armstrong. Nat King Cole says, his words are a little strong. I wouldn't put it that way. And Adam Clayton Powell says, don't listen to Louis Armstrong. He's not up on current events. And Armstrong responds, I might not be up on current events, but I'm up on head whooping. And so that is what hurt Armstrong to the day he died. He was already hurt that his audiences were leaving him. He always told the story of playing in Houston at the same time as Louis Jordan in the early 50s, and the entire black population went to see Louis Jordan. And that always hurt him. But then the criticism he got over Little Rock really stung him till the day he died. And now we can look back, and everything I said, everything he does in the 20s, 30s, and 40s is paving the road for the civil rights era. And then to put his career on the line at the height of everything and tell off the president, tell off the government, refuse to go to Russia. How that doesn't erase those old myths, I don't know. But, every time we tell that story, like on social media, the Louis Armstrong House page and everything, people still every year, oh my God, I never knew that. Oh, it's the first time I ever heard of that. And it's like, well, like I said, there's still work to be done.
Yes. Wow. So well spoken on that. Thank you for that, Ricky. Beautiful stuff. I want to ask if Alexa and Zach could play Louis Armstrong live clip. And I think this is from the Colgate something. Do you know what's from?
Yeah, Colgate Comedy Hour, November 18th, 1951. I think that's something like that.
How do you memorize these dates, Ricky?
Because I've been living this since I'm 39 now, and Armstrong hit me between the eyes when I was 15. So yeah, 24 years of devotion.
Okay, so what was the recording that got your ears first?
It was two things. It was seeing him in the movie The Glenn Miller Story. I saw that first, and he comes out and does Basin Street Blues, and I knew of him, but just watching him and hearing the trumpet, hearing his voice, the whole persona, everything just kind of caught me. And I said, okay, I need to hear more. And that's when I got a cassette from the local library, 16 most requested songs, with all the George Avakian stuff from the 1950s. And with each passing track, I was like, what is happening? I just felt like something changing. And then track 14 was St. Louis Blues, the 9-minute version from Louis Armstrong Plays W.C. Handy. And around minute 8.5 or 8 or so, Trummy Young's trombone is just filthy. And the band is just, getting louder and louder. And all of a sudden, Louis takes over for the last 2 choruses. And that was the moment. That was the moment that I realized that no music had ever moved me like that. And so I realized, well, nothing's ever going to be the same. I need to hear everything. I need to read everything. I need to learn everything about this guy. And when I started reading the negative stuff about the 1950s Armstrong, I was like, wait a minute, that's stuff that changed my life. And so, I went back to the 1920s and had my mind blown. But that's when the seeds were planted that, no, people they're not taking this guy seriously enough. And
yeah.
25 years later, this October.
Wow, fantastic. Well, this particular recording I like because back in the day when a guy would record a solo or something, they kind of wanted to hear the audiences in the live performance. They wanted to hear a similar solo or that solo. Because they had memorized the 45, usually 45 or something. So they wanted to sing along with you, So you got Johnny Hodges playing Sunny Side of the Street, and you can sing along with it. And it's simple enough. It's not like a bebop thing. And a lot of the solos were doing that. This particular recording is, do you know the name of this tune? Is this Bugle Call Rag or?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So he does Bugle Call Rag, which he played a lot of times. But to me, I'd never heard him play these things. It was totally spontaneous to me. He's loving it all. And within the complexity and the swing of the music that is absolutely, it just grabs you. There's still entertainment going on that he's doing back and forth with the guys on camera. So let's run this second clip. All I can say is wow. To me, that's I think I can come up with unbridled joy. And when I hear it, I mean, I don't know if I'm the only one, but I just get lifted. I don't know. It's like I'm in church.
I got the word joy right over my shoulder, and people ask me all the time, what was it when I was 15 that did it when I saw that movie? That was it. Louis Armstrong makes you feel good. And, you can go deeper, and my whole life has been spent deeper. But at the end of the day, he still brings me joy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in your book, you quoted Ossie Davis, who said, I began to understand something about Lewis. He could put on a show, he could do the whole thing, because in that horn of his, he had the power to kill. Interesting word choice. That horn could kill a man. So there was where the truth of Louis Armstrong resided. Was I think he's saying in the horn. He said, whatever he was, the moment he put the trumpet to his lips, this is deep. A new truth emerged. A new man emerged. A new power emerged. And I looked on Lewis for what he truly was after that. Because he had an angelic presence to me after that moment. So I want to know, why did you put that particular quote in your book? And do you have those same feelings, I assume, yes, in your heart? Because that was at the end of your book. So where did you get that quote? Because I've never heard, I'm an Ossie Davis fan as an actor, so.
Yeah, he actually delivered that in a monologue. If you go to YouTube and search Ossie Davis, Louis Armstrong, it's some television special probably in the early 80s. And he delivers this beautiful monologue about how he used to feel about Armstrong. And then he sees Armstrong on the set of A Man Called Adam, just looking so sullen. And, it was that kind of thing. Like I said, people had to kind of get close to him and realize everything, realize the joy, realize the pain, realize what a human being, complete, complex human being this was. But that trumpet, that's the trumpet that, whether it was Little Rock or whether it's Carnegie Hall or whether it's Japan or stopping a civil war in Africa, that trumpet was, the universal language. And I think the angelic presence thing, I think that is the other aspect of it, because there's a million great trumpet players, a million great musicians, but researching these books, talking to people who met him, who, even if it was just an autograph backstage, they all have the same story. Terry Teacher and I were comparing notes. We both wrote books on Armstrong, couldn't find one person to say anything bad about him, which is just, not normal. I'm not saying he's, perfect. I cover his flaws too. But, Arvell Shaw, who you were very close with, used to talk about, wanting people to know that, when Louis Armstrong walked down the street, when he landed at the airport, when he waited backstage, people treated him like a god. And, he's much more than just a great trumpet player or a great musician or a great singer. He's all of that. But I think, it really is that kind of angelic presence. That's why people are still attracted to him, like I said, almost 50 years after he's gone. Why people, before the virus hit, but why people were still coming to Corona, international visitors coming into the Louis Armstrong House Museum, weeping as soon as they walked in. It's
you saw that actually happened. People
people come from the airport and they bring their bags and they just walk in and just start crying, or they take the tour and they start crying. The docents at the house tell stories about people crying all the time. And it just shows you how Lewis's story touches people, and so took me a while to also get that through to my students too, because they just want to analyze the rhythms and what does he play over the changes and, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, once you really hook into Lewis, you also have to deal with the humanity too. And that humanity, there's so much you could learn from that guy, especially in this day and age.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you one more, but I already forgot it. Can you tell us, that's what I wanted to ask. Can you tell us, you're talking about meeting people in the airport. Can you tell us what happened when he met Richard Nixon in the airport?
This story is probably apocryphal, but it's so good. I don't want to be the one to say that it didn't happen, even though it probably didn't happen this way. But the story as told is that they were in Idlewild Airport in the late 50s, and Lewis had in his bag a heavy-duty amount of marijuana and was a little nervous about how he was going to get through customs. And then Vice President Nixon at the time comes up, oh, Satchmo, is there anything I could do for you? And Lewis said, well, Dad, you can carry my bags. And so Nixon ends up carrying Armstrong's marijuana satchel across customs. It's a beautiful story. Like I said, I've done a little research. There's one possibility it could have happened actually in Japan. They were both in Japan at the same time in 1953, and then immediately after, Louis Armstrong's wife Lucille was arrested for the possession of marijuana. I have a whole chapter about it in my first book, and so it's possible that Nixon might have fingered the Armstrongs once he realized what happened. It's a great story. Don't let me spoil it for you.
Let's leave it as you told it there. We have to begin to come to a close here, but for me, there was a magical spiritual quality about his music, as we've already talked about, and to this day it continues as it just did in the two videos that we showed. It gives me chills, gives me goosebumps, and gives me inner peace. So what I want you to do is share with us, if you could, and share with our audience, so we don't miss a moment of Louis Armstrong's artistry. Is there something that we must, besides your coming book, and people have already texted me on my text, and they are already ordering your book, and I just want to tell everybody once again, the first one is What a Wonderful World, The Magic of Louis Armstrong's Later Years, and that's Riccardi. So right on Amazon, everybody should order that now. Before, as soon as you get off, and you'll get that, and you will be lifted and moved through that. What's your new book going to be called?
It's going to be called Heart Full of Rhythm, The Big Band Years of Louis Armstrong. It's coming out through Oxford University Press. Looking like late July, early August. I don't know if there's going to be any delays, but it's in production as we speak.
Oh, fantastic. So tell our audience, if you could recommend what songs, what music, what movies, what videos we need to experience of Louis Armstrong, and the ones that you feel that have that spiritual power, spiritual power that resonates through every bone in his body.
I mean, I hear it in everything I really do. The Jazz St. Louis just asked me to put together a Spotify playlist of 25 essential Armstrong recordings, and maybe I'll leave a link for that in the comments to this video, so everybody could go right to the heart of the matter. Yeah. Speaking freely, I mean, the 1950s George Avakian stuff, that's what changed my life. That's still my number one. Louis Armstrong plays W.C. Handy.
They should know that George Avakian was a great producer. You became great friends with George?
Oh, he was like an uncle to me. Yeah, it was, getting to know him was just a dream. Every time I was in his presence, it was just magic. And he produced the records that single-handedly changed my life. So Armstrong plays Handy, Satch plays Fats, Ambassador Satch. That's for the mid-50s stuff. The hot fives and sevens kind of speak for themselves. I almost don't mention them sometimes because I feel like everybody knows them. But if you don't know them, that is the building blocks of not just jazz, but pop music. It's all there. Everything that followed is on those records. I have my next book is all about the big band. So I have a deep, deep love affair of his OK big band recordings, like 1929 to 32. Decca, I co-produced the digital set, the Decca singles 35 to 46, which has everything that you could dream of. And then Ella Fitzgerald and Louis, anything they did together. Louis meets Oscar Peterson, Louis and Duke Ellington, Louis and the Dukes of Dixieland, Louis and Dave Brubeck, the Real Ambassadors. Live stuff, Satchmo at Symphony Hall, the Great Chicago Concert, Satchmo, the musical autobiography, which I think has his best trumpet playing in the 50s. The Hello Dolly album was great. Oh man, he plays great on that. I mean, if videos, the 1933 Denmark stuff is the tops. There's a complete concert from East Berlin in 1965 on YouTube, which is at the very end of the game. But my God, Black and Blue and all these things, it's really him going out on Shield, Last Hurrah kind of stuff. And I can do this for another hour, but start with that and see me in the morning.
Well, Ricky, what a joy, a privilege, and an honor to be with you for just a few minutes. Would you come back if we invited you later?
Anytime. Say the
really?
word.
Okay.
Scratch the surface.
Yes, that's the thing people don't realize. We need to take an ancestry DNA test, you and I, to see if we're related, because I feel like you're my brother. Yeah. And you sing my song every time you speak, and I just want you to know how much I love you, and how much we thank you for being here. For our audience, please go grab his book, What a Wonderful World, and get Heart Full of Rhythm, coming out at the beginning or the end of July, beginning of August. Ricky Riccardi, you are something special. Thank you for igniting the flame of Louis Armstrong and keeping it burning.
Man, thank you for all you do, Byron. I love you, and together we'll conquer the world.
Absolutely. We love you, and we'll see everybody soon. Thank you.
Yeah.